The story begins in a village named Edger. The red-haired boy dressed like a cowboy here is Bit. He is participating in a hunting trip. However, Bit could do nothing but run when the beast rushed toward him. This caused a girl named Elsha to step out and deal with it for Bit while he hid behind her back. The villagers immediately came to harvest the beast. Not far from the group of Bit hunting animals, the group of women in the village were climbing the mountain to pick herbs. They even brought children along to keep an eye on them conveniently. The kids were joyfully playing and running around everywhere. One child leaned his body over the cliff to look at something. Then he was swept and slipped down. Luckily, a green-haired girl noticed and used a rope to pull the child up. Through the kids' words, this girl was Atli. Not long after Atli's group gathered with Bit's group, he excitedly boasted about the beasts that he did not actually hunt. However, with just such a small one, it was not enough for the whole village to eat. While they were discouraged, suddenly there was a noise from the sky, the sound whirring like tearing apart the sky. When Bit was still bewildered, an object rushed down from above and destroyed his house. The loud sound attracted the villagers. They gathered around the thing that just fell. They discussed what it was, but no matter what it was, Bit had to kick it once because it destroyed his house. The villagers believed this was treasure from heaven, and inside there would surely be food. They happily organized a feast. That afternoon they gathered around the iron mass and lit a fire, joyfully singing because they were about to eat deliciously. They danced happily, not knowing that two people were watching from afar, below the village of Edger. Bit could not stand it anymore. He used a stick to smash the object to open it. With each strike, Elsha gradually realized this was not food. But it was too late when Bit struck one last blow. Then inside, a person popped out and punched him away. The children thought that food was running, so they hurried to bite. The mysterious boy painfully screamed that he was not food. Above, the white-haired man was also very surprised when witnessing. That night the villagers sat listening to the boy talking. He remembered nothing at all, only a few fragments of memory about him being on the other side of the wall, and asked the villagers to help him return. Hearing that, they all burst into laughter. Elsha explained to the boy. The land he was standing on was called Lingaland. It was a world surrounded by a wall. This wall helped conceal the land, protect, nurture, and sustain it. The wall was seen by the people as nothing less than God. Inside, the wall was divided into two large nations. On the right was Ludo, a place for scholars of knowledge. On the left was the Republic of Rekka, a place honoring the courage of generals. The villagers believed the whole world lay within this wall, so there was nothing outside to help him go there. Even so, the boy still wanted the villagers' help to bring him closer to the wall. But they could not because this place was almost the center of the wall and very far away. Hearing that, the boy decided to go by himself without needing them. The white-haired man who had been observing since morning when he heard about the other side of the wall was also very surprised. At this time, a driver came to the village of Edger. Without saying a word, he put a bracelet to his ear, then transformed into a robot. It turned out this guy was ordered to collect the thing that had just fallen into the village. However, when he found it empty inside, he turned to question the villagers. He said this thing was called Rakuho, and inside it surely contained treasure, and the villagers had taken all the treasure and hidden it. Hearing that, the whole village unanimously pointed at the black-haired boy. But the bandit said he was not stupid to say this filthy guy was the Rakuho treasure. Feeling wasting time, the bandit began to devastate around. Bit's newly repaired house was broken again. The villagers ran in panic. Atli ran into her house to take out her father's keepsake. Outside, Elsha tried to hold him off for the villagers to evacuate. However, her bullets had no effect on the robot. She shouted for the boy to quickly speak up to help her. He stepped forward, explaining, and conveniently asked the bandit to help him cross the wall. Of course, that guy also thought he was still playing tricks and attacked. The boy jumped toward Elsha without wearing anything, complaining that the guy didn't listen to his explanation. Elsha blushed and told him to put on pants. At this time, Atli ran over and handed the boy the underwear of her late father. After giving it, she took out a ring similar to the bandit's and wore it on her hand. She then transformed and fought the bandit. Even though it was a machine body, Atli's Brihite was very flexible and agile in dodging attacks. She used a whip to strike. The boy asked the villagers what that was. The professor in the village called these machines Brihite, and the ring was called a bind warper. As long as there was belief, the wearer could transform. But Atli was caught by the bandit. He intended to crush her. The villagers shouted for her to break free, otherwise she would die together with the Brihite. But the bandit prevented that from happening. Hearing this seemed serious, so the black-haired boy decided to save the girl who had lent him underwear. He ran back to the Rakuho and took out a bind warper. Though he remembered nothing, he affirmed one thing, that he was very strong. To everyone's astonishment, he put on the ring and transformed. Then he helped Atli escape from the Brehite. Not letting the bandit talk nonsense, the boy knocked on his head with a chop, making him angry, then dragged him down the mountain to continue fighting. Both of them fell freely. Upon landing, the bandit quickly struck the black-haired boy's back, but unexpectedly his Brehite was even more flexible than Atli's, making the bandit confused. He fired a rain of bullets at him, but the flexible body still blocked them. He began to counterattack with many punches. He punched him flying into the sky, then kicked him down to the ground, finishing the bandit with a flurry of strikes, then destroyed the bind warper. Unexpectedly, his way of finishing did not kill the pilot, but let him escape. Everyone was surprised, asking who he was. The boy confidently said, "I am Back Arrow." After saying that, Back transformed again, said farewell to everyone, then flew toward the wall. But no matter how long he went, the wall showed no sign of getting closer, making him exhausted and returned to human form. While lamenting hunger, a white-haired boy appeared. He introduced himself as Shu Bai, and the girl was Sin. Shu Bai expressed surprise that Back could maintain Brehite form for as long as 5 hours. The longest he knew someone could was only 2 hours. Shu Bai had previously eavesdropped that Back was from the other side of the wall, so he curiously asked him what was over there. Back also could not remember clearly. When he was about to say what he recalled, Sin interrupted, angrily asserting there was nothing at all on the other side. Shu Bai said the wall was as high as 10,000 meters, and explained it would need 5,678 people as tall as Back stacked together to reach the top. But it seemed Back's head could not absorb this knowledge, so he punched Shu Bai in the face. Sin rushed to protect her master, but Shu Bai blocked her weapon with his thigh. He used his flesh to calm Back, then suggested he would help him cross the wall, but Back would need to wait a few days because Shu Bai had to recalculate. After all, he himself didn't know what was outside the wall. Back agreed when he heard. Meanwhile, in the village, Atli was being treated after the battle. When she stabilized, she remembered Back. Alone, he could not cross the wall, so they needed to find him and stop him. However, when going outside, she saw Back already lying asleep at the door. As for Shu Bai, although Sin was grumpy, she would not interfere in his business. She only reminded him if the emperor knew, he would be in trouble. The two returned to meet a general named Kai. He asked about the second Rakuho, but Shu Bai avoided the topic and left. The next morning, Back was given clothes sewn by Bit. To repay, he rebuilt for Bit a new house to replace the one he had destroyed. But it was nothing more than a dog hut. Elsha still doubted Back. She believed his amnesia was fake and everything about the other side of the wall was just acting. After exchanging looks with the village elder, she took Back hunting with her. While Atli stayed at the hunting ground, Elsha showed Back Edger village. This place was very small, resources only enough for them to live day by day. Atli was the sheriff and still took care of many orphans. They were gradually dying, so they could not let Back stay here. Because he was considered the Rakuho being hunted by bandits, they could not afford to be attacked like last time. Back curiously asked why they did not just migrate away. Elsha explained that because the two nations Rekka and Ludo were at war, and it had been extremely difficult for them to reach this place to settle. Hearing that, Back innocently said then it was fine to just go beyond the wall. But Elsha and the villagers did not believe there was anything there to live on. Meanwhile, in the Republic of Rekka, Shu Bai assigned Sin the task of monitoring Back. He even gave her the seal to enter the Forbidden Archive. He would make a copy of it and find a way to cross the wall before this tiny world learned of Back's existence. On the side of Ludo, the bandit's ring had been brought back. The officials were discussing with mercenaries when Princess Fine entered. It turned out Ludo had used mercenaries to retrieve Rakuho instead of the army to maintain their image as a peaceful nation. Fine wanted them to capture Back at all costs. She believed he was the key to holding peace. Following the princess's wish, they contacted the lord governing the territory of Edger village, but he refused to let Ludo's soldiers run rampant in his land. However, the official threatened to level his territory, so he relented. That afternoon, the soldiers of Iki territory came to Edger village. He demanded Back be handed over, but Back had already left early. Hearing that the lord ordered his soldiers to erase Edger village, the commander obeyed, transformed, and began the massacre. Atli once again stepped forward to stop him, but since she had a smaller body, the commander tied her up and tossed her around. In the crisis, Elsha discovered another ring inside the Rakuho. She quickly transformed, but for some reason when she landed, she fell into a pit and disappeared. Atli was strangled and forced to detransform. While Bit was running away, he encountered Back, who had not left but was sleeping in the well. Hearing the villagers were in danger, without hesitation he put on the ring and flew in to kick the commander. Meanwhile, underground Elsha heard a voice inside the Brihite asking her to accept being the pilot. Above, when Bak had just beaten the commander, the ground started shaking, and Elsha emerged carrying an entire ship. When she separated, the ship stopped over with Shu Bai. Kai had learned of Bak's existence through Sin. He questioned Shu Bai, but Shu Bai said he was investigating and had found something interesting in the Forbidden Archive. That was a ship with power to destroy the entire world. Kai sighed, telling Shu Bai to be careful not to be too blatant because the Emperor was already noticing his actions. Shu Bai said he would soon send a report back at Edger. Bak excitedly asked Elsha to take him to the wall, but she refused because she had to care for the villagers. No matter how he persuaded, she still refused. Meanwhile, Bit had made some arrangement with the commander. That night, the whole village gathered to capture Bak. They believed their lord only wanted him, so they would hand him over to ensure peace for the village. Bak sleepily said they could do whatever they wanted. However, late at night, Atli secretly came to release Bak. She did not want to sacrifice someone for her own benefit, and she did not believe a man who tried to kill the entire village would spare them if they handed Bak over. Elsha appeared behind, pointing a gun at Atli. Bak spoke up to stop her because he understood the seriousness of the matter. He would not run away and cause everyone else to be involved. After all, Bak only wanted to reach the wall without affecting anyone. Then he asked Elsha if that man was lying, and then turned on the village. What then? She had the power to control an entire ship, yet still accepted to cling to others like this. He woke up remembering nothing about himself, but he knew if he denied his own feelings, then nothing of him remained. The next day, everyone together set out. Bak was locked in a cage. Atli discovered his ring had also been taken. Realizing it was Bit's idea, she showed her disappointment with him. When they arrived, the Lord joyfully welcomed them and showed the villagers the land he promised to give them, making them very happy. After completing the handover of the man and the ring, the villagers departed, while Bit requested to join the army. He gained nothing here because Atli already hated him. When the villagers left, Bit fired farewell cannons. However, the lord of the territory activated the bombs that had been planted, causing a landslide that sank the entire ship. He believed that wiping out Edger village was the best way to save his territory, because if the two nations Rekka and Ludo learned of the existence of that ship, they would not hesitate to attack this land. That's politics. When Bit realized he had been tricked, he was furious, while Bak laughed loudly, making the commander so angry he shot him. When the commander intended to send Bit to the grave along with the village, Bak threw a rock at him. Bit seized the chance, snatched back the ring, and threw it to Bak, begging him to save his village. That was all Bak needed. He burst forth, transformed, carried Bit, and flew toward Elsha, who was sinking. He ignored the fact that they had betrayed him, because he was generous by nature. He encouraged Elsha to stand up, because only by relying on oneself could one save oneself. She then rose up and lifted the entire ship to escape danger. The commander still would not give up, so he transformed and pursued them. This time Atli stepped forward to settle her old grudge with him. Just like last time, she was grabbed, tossed around, but at a moment when he fired bullets at her, Atli redirected the bullets back at him. When he was injured, Bak rushed in, unleashed a flurry of punches, and finished the commander. Afterwards, the whole village returned to warn the lord of the territory before leaving. This time, they would head to the other side of the wall, where they were sure to find a place they belonged. As for Shu Bai, he reported to the emperor about the wall and the weapon of mass destruction without mentioning Bak. He even requested the right to personally destroy it. 15 years earlier in the Republic of Rekka, in a starving village, children were given away to Rekka because the villagers had no money or food, among them Kai and Shu Bai. However, instead of accepting the fate of slavery, the two decided they would prove their worth to the capital, and from there became the two great generals they are today. Kai came to wish Shu Bai success in this campaign, all for the promise of the northern wall between the two of them. Back to Bak's group, Elsha brought out a map of Lingaland. The western half was Rekka, the eastern half Ludo. Around were some smaller nations like the Iki territory here. The group discussed a safe route to the wall. The doctor suggested traveling north along the neutral zone, where there was a pedestrian route between Rekka and Ludo, because it was neutral ground. There would also be many merchants, and they could trade for necessary supplies. It sounded reasonable, so all agreed. Bit's voice suddenly cut in, announcing that Rekka's army had already blocked their path, and that was Shu Bai. Then Sin delivered a message from the emperor to Bak's group, stating that anyone daring to think of crossing the wall was destroying Lingaland's order. He did not allow negotiations and ordered them destroyed. The doctor informed them they would hide in Bankia, a neutral trading city in the northeast. With a plan in place, all three Bak, Elsha, and Atli transformed, and they set off. On the opposite side, Xu Bai deployed 4 mercenaries he had hired. They transformed and sprayed some kind of gas that halted the ship. Xu Bai then came to speak with Bak, assuring him this would be useful for both sides, so Bak should just do his best. He then left, letting the 4 mercenaries strike. After a brief exchange of introductions, the battle began. Bak moved first. Then Atli used her whip to bind the yellow one, but he dragged her down to the ground. Bak turned back to rescue her, but was blocked by the wind and water of the green and blue ones. Red also spewed fire, overwhelming Bak together. Seeing the one-sided situation, Elsha left the ship to support Atli, but Blue was still able to kick Elsha away and keep pinning Atli to the ground. Bak was still being pummeled by the trio's elemental attacks, his mouth forced shut. When he was beaten down, they swarmed and boasted of their united strength. Hearing the word unity, Bak remembered something. Then he used a new ability of his, creating clones. Bak made 4 clones, and together they defeated the 4 superhuman brothers. He also exhausted himself greatly from creating the clones. Right at that moment, Sin ordered the entire army to surround Bak's group, commanding their annihilation. But Xu Bai intervened, causing Brihites and weapons to explode one after another. He then imprisoned Sin and went to meet Bak's group. Xu Bai surrendered and voluntarily became a prisoner of the Brihites. After observing the battle, he concluded that Bak was worthy for him to join, reasoning that in order to cross the wall they would need an intelligent brain, and Xu Bai applied himself for that role. He told Sin to return and report to the capital that he had betrayed them. Xu Bai entrusted the task of escorting Sin back to the mercenaries and departed with Bak's group. Xu Bai was later tied up for interrogation. Although he had no hostile intent, Bit did not trust him, because he had been tricked once before and could not easily trust again. Xu Bai realized this would be very difficult. When Sin returned, she tearfully reported to Kai that Xu Bai had betrayed them. The story then shifted back to 10 years earlier. When Rakuho began appearing, Kai and Xu Bai had been sent out as if they were slaves. Thanks to Xu Bai's calculating mind, the two quickly found the crash site of a Rakuho. However, a group of soldiers arrived first, intending to use it to start a rebellion. At that time, Kai fought them alone. But when Rekka's regular army led by T arrived, he judged Kai and Xu Bai to also be rebels and ordered their deaths. Xu Bai had to use his hand to block a strike meant for Kai. Then the Emperor appeared and took interest in both of them. Returning to the present, Kai personally went to find Xu Bai, wanting to understand why his friend had done this. Back with Bak's group, Xu Bai and Dr. Sola worked together to study and activate the ship. While examining the control panel, Elsha reported an enemy, this time only one person, and it was Kai. He then transformed, single-handedly blocking the entire ship. Not stopping there, Kai flew to Elsha, forced her off the ship, and struck her with a blast that reverted her to human form. Kai called Xu Bai to face him, demanding to know why Xu Bai had abandoned Rekka. Xu Bai said Rekka was a sinking ship, one he and Kai had once raised together. But now Xu Bai had found a new ship. Kai angrily asked about their promise, but Xu Bai painfully answered that from now on, Bak and this ship were his new dream. After Xu Bai's words, Bak also stepped out, transformed, and charged at Kai. Kai bound Bak with his flaming spear and spun him around. Bak quickly created clones to attack from multiple directions, managing to land a blow on Kai. But Kai seized Bak's arm and unleashed energy from his chest, knocking Bak down. Elsha and Atli rushed in to support, but Xu Bai stepped forward to stop them. He told everyone to cease transforming and went to talk with Kai. The two conversed, and Kai recalled their old promise. 5 years earlier, during Kai's first transformation, he was already different from the rest, so the Emperor highly valued him. 3 years later, thanks to his talent, Kai was promoted to general, while Xu Bai became a chief astrologer for a year. The two had promised to change their nation together. Kai had once cut his arm, mirroring the injury Xu Bai took for him, and that was their shared promise. But Xu Bai's arm had since healed, and he remembered nothing of that promise. Enraged, Kai grabbed Xu Bai. Xu Bai replied that Kai only wanted to change their nation, while he wanted to change the entire world, and to do that, he placed his bet on Bak instead of Kai. Hearing this, Kai no longer wished to talk. He drew his weapon and declared Xu Bai an enemy of Rekka. At that moment, Bit ambushed Kai, but with a single thrust of his hand into Bit's stomach, Bit was instantly done for. Kai then turned back toward Xu Bai, walked toward him calmly, and lowered his sword, but Bak quickly shielded Xu Bai. Kai slashed, breaking Bak's gun, but Bak still managed to pull the trigger, creating a smoke screen that was enough for him to transform. Kai transformed as well to continue the fight, but Xu Bai stopped him. He then had the ship fire a warning shot into the sky. Kai scoffed, but Sin did not. Because the bullet reached all the way to the capital, Kai found it hard to believe. So Shu Bai fired another shot near the palace. Kai, frustrated and furious because he could do nothing, left behind a challenge, declaring he would return, then departed. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief for escaping danger. While Shu Bai revealed that the wound on his arm was still there, he had only hidden it to trick Kai, and in fact, Shu Bai himself didn't even know how far the ship's cannons could fire. Dr. Sola explained that earlier they had only released gas, and the explosion was because Shu Bai had planted bombs in the capital beforehand. Gradually, everyone began to trust Shu Bai, and they continued their journey before Kai could realize the deception. In Rekka, the Emperor received news from T that Kai had failed to destroy the ship and execute Shu Bai. He ordered Kai banned from receiving further missions and prepared punishment for him. In the days that followed, Shu Bai researched the ship's system and made it possible to move without Elsha, though it could only fly straight and nothing more. But even so, it gave Elsha time to rest before piloting again. While Elsha recovered, everyone explored the warship. Inside, it had everything from classrooms to weapons. Meanwhile in Rekka, Kai was disciplining himself after his failure. The Minister of Defense came to speak with him, informing him that the previous night the Emperor had left to suppress rebels in the west, leaving T with the highest authority in the capital. He also announced that Sin's punishment would come in 3 days, but hinted that during those 3 days Sin could act freely within the capital. Hearing this, Sin immediately left, and the minister, having finished his part, also departed. In the following days, Bak's group continued traveling and camping. They soon crossed Ludo's territory and entered the autonomous region of Walston, where defenses were very loose, allowing them to pass through. Shu Bai guessed that Sin had 3 days to investigate his trick, so they would use that time to reach the wall. They continued on their way, and one night, Elsha spotted a Brihite blocking their warship. He demanded the ship stop, but Elsha said it couldn't just stop at will, and if he didn't want to die, he should move. Hearing this, the Brihite tried to block the ship, and everyone thought he might be as strong as Kai. But Bak appeared and saved him just before he was crushed. Even after being saved, the boy still attacked Bak, so Bak had to throw him aside, reverting him back to human form. Bit saw him and praised him for being cute, which made Atli glare at him half-heartedly. The boy then collapsed from exhaustion. The group carried him back to the place he mentioned, a land called the Pretty Boy Farm. There, a boy named Bra came out and spoke to them all. At first they were suspicious, but when Bak brought out food, they lowered their guard. Bak was curious why the people there glowed, and Bra explained that they were livestock of Lord Walston. Sola examined the children and discovered a horrifying truth: their brains were fake, meaning they were living as if already dead. Someone added that once a month, chosen ones were taken to a laboratory, and when they returned, they were in a terrible state. Pretty Boy was the nickname given to the livestock. They were originally children from poor villages, sold to Walston. But after witnessing his friends being brutally abused, Bra rebelled, stole a ring, and became a Brihite. He then took over the farm as a last refuge, since they had nowhere else to go. Shu Bai thought this was fairly normal in how nations used the poor. Ludo did experiments. Rekka used them as slaves. Bak listened, and then suggested that Bra's group join him at the wall, where they might find a better life outside. But while they were still hesitant, Lord Walston attacked the farm. Bak stepped forward and easily drove away the Lord's men. That evening, everyone ate together, but Bra sat alone in sorrow, blaming himself for being too weak to protect anyone. Seeing that words of comfort would not help, Bak left with Shu Bai to do something. Later, 3 of them, Shu Bai, Bak, and Bit, went directly to confront Lord Walston. And by the next morning, they had joined Walston in preparing to attack the Pretty Boy Farm. Walston agreed to give Bak a map of Ludo if they helped, and they even brought many rings to prepare for the raid. Bra, though very scared, could not just stand still and accept death like this, so he stepped out alone to confront Bak. Bra transformed and began releasing smoke around. Then he rushed in to attack Bak. While Bra was buying time, the remaining handsome group began their move. Shu Bai signaled for that group to be found. Then they punched Bit to snatch the ring from Walston. Then all of them transformed together. Once that was done, the Bak group turned the tables as well. But the map was no longer needed because Shu Bai had memorized it after just one glance. In the end, the Lord was defeated before the handsome group. Once it was over, the Bak group said farewell to Bra and left, continuing their journey to the wall. Today Bit and Shu Bai agreed to give each Brihite its own personal name, since that would help individualize them and nurture stronger trust. After settling on the names, Shu Bai called them back to the issue at hand. because it seemed the Northern Rekka guards had their eyes on their ship, under the command of Bai, the Northern General, according to Shu Bai. Fighting in the neutral zone was prohibited by the Caravan Road Treaty. If Rekka did not want trouble, they would stay away from their ship. That was also why their destination was where the wall connected with the neutral zone. At this moment, the children came running to call Elsha and Atli because the villagers had something to say. It turned out the village elder had decided to take half the people away, afraid that if they destroyed the wall they would be cursed. However, Elsha and the children still decided to continue going. Meanwhile in Ludo, Lord Walston had been summoned after the incident. First, he disobeyed orders and attacked the back group's ship, when the princess had wanted it brought back peacefully. Second, he had experimented on innocent children. He tried to excuse himself, but she would not listen. She declared this was the last time she would let it pass, and if he repeated it, there would be punishment for him. After saying that, she left. Lord Walston thought he had escaped disaster and was overjoyed. But on his way out he was stopped and had one arm cut off for daring to disappoint the princess. The one who did this was Commander Prax, another loyal aide of Princess Fine. She later gathered with 2 other aides of the princess to talk. She knew the 2 had still not managed to bring the back group's ship to the princess, so this time Prax herself would go to the battlefield to do it. As for the back group, they had finally arrived near the wall. Back eagerly transformed into Brehite and charged to break the wall, but it was too solid. Even with Atli supporting, nothing worked. General Bai very much wanted to attack, but T did not allow it for fear that back ship could attack the capital from afar. He still believed Shu Bai's bluff was real. Just then, Sin had investigated and found the bombs Shu Bai had planted to trick them. The minister reported it to T. Though knowing they had been deceived, T still did not hurry to act because the back group's ship was still in the neutral zone. If they attacked, it would break the treaty with Rekka and Ludo. Bai was extremely frustrated at not being allowed to act. In the back group, Shu Bai used Elsha combined with the ship to fire a cannon at the wall, but the result still failed. At that moment, some engines appeared below the wall blowing the back group's ship away. They were being pushed toward Rekka territory. Bai immediately ordered an attack. Back and Atli stepped out to fight Bai to push the ship back toward the neutral zone. However, Bai had his soldiers spread smoke like last time to stop the ship from moving. Then they swarmed onto the ship to attack. Atli withdrew to defend, while Elsha held her position waiting for Shu Bai's orders. Back was struggling against Bai's hammer, while Bai was swinging his weapon. It was snatched away by a Brehite that was Prax. She introduced herself as an ambassador from Ludo. Bai considered this a violation of the treaty, but Prax said she had not touched the ground yet, so it did not count as territorial violation. That little time was already enough. Shu Bai released gas from the ship to clear all the smoke and shut down its effect. Elsha quickly maneuvered the ship back into neutral airspace. Bai was enraged, but could do nothing. T, observing, also ordered him to retreat. Prax then directly met the entire back group. She delivered the message from the princess, saying the princess wanted to meet them, and that the matter of breaking the wall was also something the princess wished to discuss. Elsha, thinking of the villagers, decided to go with them. But Back did not. He did not want to rely on anyone and would find a way to break the wall himself. Prax did not press him. She would escort the villagers first and then return to persuade Back. He then temporarily parted with Elsha's group and began breaking the wall alone. Meanwhile, Kai and Sin were also beginning their plan to make Shu Bai regret. On the ship, Prax briefly introduced Ludo. The country was currently ruled by 6 nobles, with Princess Fine, a pacifist, as the current leader. Once she finished explaining, the ship had already entered Ludo's territory. Atli asked Elsha if it was really fine to leave Back behind, and she replied he would be fine since Dr. Solo was also staying with Back. Everyone then entered the capital amidst the cheers of the people. The princess welcomed the villagers to her country. Meanwhile in Western Rekka, the emperor had just finished dealing with the rebellious army, returning to Elsha's group. The villagers were invited to a lavish feast, while Elsha and Atli went to bathe. Both were amazed at the splendor of this place, and they also met the princess there. The princess promised to provide shelter for Elsha's villagers. Back, however, after a tiring day of punching the wall, still achieved nothing. But this was the only thing he could do without depending on anyone. He wanted to uncover his past, so he wished to return to the other side of the wall. Back asked why Sola did not go to Ludo, and the doctor replied he had his reasons. While they were talking, Sola suddenly stepped back. Back looked behind and saw Prax rushing, and she grabbed Back, saying that since he refused to return, she had no choice but to use force. Back was not about to give in. He transformed, and coincidentally, he He also wanted to make use of Prax's flying ability. He created clones and threw them all upward, then used them as anchors to propel himself toward Prax. Bak then forced her to carry him above the wall. Prax did not resist but complied and took him up. The higher they went, the denser the clouds became. When they passed through the cloud layer, both were suddenly attacked devices that prevented anyone from flying too high. If they continued, the devices would discharge electricity to kill them all. Thus, Bak's attempt to break through the wall was impossible. Still, Bak refused to accept it and tried to propel upward. But Prax pulled him back and beat him down. At that moment, Rakuho appeared. Bak seized the chance to cling onto it and escape. Meanwhile, Shubai had met with two of the princess's aides. They already knew each other from before. Both wanted Shubai to reveal Rekka's secret. He agreed on the condition that they allow him to see the Brihite improvement process regarding Prax's ability to fly. Shubai pointed out it was a massive breakthrough. He also noted that currently, only Prax and Ludo could fly, but said that if he participated in the improvement process, all Brihites could fly. Shubai then also received news of Rakuho's appearance. Bak had been captured again, while Dr. Solar remained at the wall, still trying to break it. The villagers rejoiced upon learning they were permitted to stay in Ludo. Bak was brought back by Prax, and Bit observed from afar. He followed Shubai's instructions and reported back to him. After receiving the news, Shubai asked to leave first. As he was escorted out, Bit tried to ambush the soldiers but was counterattacked by two people. Shubai then shocked them with electricity. Meanwhile, Bak was being subjected to experiments. They repeatedly electrocuted him to test whether he was a normal human. Bit and Shubai witnessed everything. Shubai instructed Bit to shoot the red button to free Bak, telling him to aim carefully. If he missed, Bit would die, but Shubai would survive since Ludo still needed his brain. Although hesitant, Bit, seeing Bak in agony, quickly took action. He successfully shot the button. Bak broke free and electrocuted the professor so he could feel his own pain. Shubai threw smoke to create an escape route for Bak. The three successfully escaped. But before they could rejoice, Prax pursued them. Bak fought back, and within a few exchanges he slashed off Prax's mask, yet unexpectedly. It was not Prax but Princess Fine herself. In reality, it was her second personality. She said anyone who saw her true face would not be allowed to live. Shubai threw smoke to retreat. They could not harm the princess, because if they did, all the villagers would be expelled again. The three of them kept running while the princess chased after them in madness. Just then Prax appeared. She asked permission to eliminate Bak's group in the princess's stead. Hearing that, the princess agreed and left first. Prax then drew her sword to carry out the task. Because anyone who knew this secret had to be silenced. Bak could not defeat Prax after all. He had just been beaten badly. He transformed to carry Shubai and Bit away. Prax immediately called the military to act. Meanwhile, Elsha stopped Atli when her friend tried to leave to help Bak. But Atli had already made her choice. She said Elsha had found a refuge for the villagers and was their leader, so her place was no longer here. She wanted to help Bak accomplish the destruction of the wall. But Elsha tried to keep Atli with her. She said everything had happened too fast. Bak suddenly appeared in the village, threw everything into chaos. Then she was merged with a ship. Elsha bore enormous pressure as chief, caring for many people, and she needed someone to confide in like Atli. While both were emotional, Bak and Prax's battle spread there. Prax continued her tactic of attacking from above. Bak could not create clones since Bit and Shubai were present, but he thought of another way. To everyone's surprise, Bak enlarged his hand to grab Prax, seemingly victorious, but Prax used a technique to blow him away, forcing him back into human form. She then began to execute all three. At that moment, Solar returned and shockingly, Prax called him her older brother. Indeed, Sola had abandoned the princess and left Ludo. The princess's split personality was also caused by him, so he left to seek a cure for her. Sola said inside the ship there was medicine to heal the princess, and he needed Shubai to understand it. As for Bak, he was someone capable of neutralizing Brihites without killing their pilots. If they could study how he did it, they would win the people's favor. As for Bit, Sola admitted he did not know his worth. Bit had to defend himself, claiming he was Shubai's secretary, and without him Shubai could do nothing. Sola agreed to let Bit live. It all sounded reasonable, but Prax said the princess's orders were absolute, so she would not allow anyone to live. Since words did not work, Sola used a flash to help them escape. Once safe, the three questioned Sola about this. The doctor revealed his true name was Werner, once of Ludo's Supreme Armored Corps. 5 years ago, the ruler suddenly died, leaving the throne vacant. Among 40 princes and princesses, Princess Fine was chosen. She was forced to rule and could not resist. Fine was a free-spirited person, like a bird soaring in the sky, and from that wish of hers, he and Prax endlessly researched and developed things that could fly. But one time, while Prax was flying with the princess, Werner shot them down, gravely injuring Fine. He did it only to make her focus on ruling, regardless of whether they hated him. Not long after, Fine officially ascended the throne. Things were stable for a while, until the princess developed a second personality. At first, only he and Prax knew, but somehow her two aides found out. They poisoned him as punishment. In that moment, Werner decided to abandon Ludo. He became a doctor and set out to find a cure for the princess. After hearing the story, the three understood Werner. They then discussed their next course. The next day, the emperor returned to Rekka. He deposed T and forced him to surrender all the wealth he had accumulated. The emperor declared that Rekka would prepare to conquer Ludo. Kai was personally pardoned by the emperor, and he and Sin went to the square to watch the emperor publicly execute the rebellious general. He displayed his might by giving the general a ring to fight with him. While he himself did not need to transform, he only needed this. In an instant, the emperor unleashed an immensely powerful strike that obliterated the general. He then raised his voice, declaring war on Ludo. Across the skies, Rekka would devour all. Meanwhile, Elsha's group had been captured and their rings confiscated. Princess Fine had barely recovered from what she had just done when the Emperor of Rekka called, informing her that in only one day Rekka would launch its invasion of Ludo. One day was enough for Ludo to surrender. Immediately, Fine switched to her other personality and challenged the Emperor, saying if he was so mighty, then come and swallow them himself. After the call ended, she ordered everyone to prepare at once and inform the people. Werner, who had gone scouting, also heard the news and returned to report it to the group. Shu Bai understood somewhat but scolded Werner for being careless enough to get tailed, and right away a soldier appeared to arrest the four of them. But before anything could happen, another figure showed up, told the soldier to leave, and welcomed Werner back, saying the Lord was waiting for him. On the carriage, Shu Bai asked who this lord was, and Werner replied that he was someone even Ludo dared not oppose. Arriving at the depraved palace, the group was brought before a corpulent man, whom Werner introduced as the Arbiter of Selection, one of the 6 highest rulers of the continent, the one who selects the king's throne. He praised Werner for bringing back such interesting people, the brain of Rekka, and someone from beyond the wall. Unlike the others who were wary, Bak stepped up boldly to face the Arbiter, saying that everyone he met radiated strong emotions, but from the Arbiter he felt nothing at all. Hearing this, the Arbiter unleashed his power as if the ring itself was inside his body, radiating tremendous pressure, and confessed that he wallowed in pleasure to deliberately dull himself, for if he ever got serious, he might destroy the entire world. This made Werner question whether his power had grown beyond control, or if there was something more hidden. At that moment, the Supreme Secretary Peeth appeared, reporting Rekka's declaration of war. The Arbiter calmly revealed that he himself was the one who had chosen Fine to ascend the throne, and further admitted that the other princes and princesses who should have been killed to prevent chaos, he had spared, keeping them as servants. Most shocking of all, he confessed that when Fine suffered her surgical accident, he had transfused his own blood to save her, believing her unyielding will made her worthy of being queen, and that this could be the cause of her second personality. Werner and the others were horrified, for if true, then her violent alter ego originated from the Arbiter himself. Right then, Peeth also reported that he could not prevent the order to execute Elsha's villagers, and Elsha was brought in. Fine ordered her to fight a Brehite duel against Prax to seize control of the ship. Fine threatened that if Elsha refused to fight, the villagers would be slaughtered, beginning with her friends, then the old, then the children, even mocking that if Elsha submitted she would cut off Brehite's legs and mount her as a figurehead on the ship's bow. Forced into a corner, Elsha had to choose: death, living crippled, or letting all the villagers die. Furious yet unyielding, she demanded one condition: if she won, the villagers must be released. Fine accepted with a mocking laugh. Certain Prax would prevail. Prax transformed and attacked relentlessly, while Elsha, despite her training, was crushed under the overwhelming pressure, taking blow after blow. No match for Prax, who even Bak couldn't defeat. Meanwhile, on his way to rescue her, Bak was intercepted by Ludo's elite armored squad, 5 against 1 in a cramped space that prevented him from cloning himself. In that moment of desperation, he realized the answer. He had to take to the skies to break through. In Brehite form, he unlocked the ability to fly a feat even Ludo's soldiers had never achieved, then soared off toward Elsha. In the arena, Prax's storm-like assaults pierced every gap, and though Elsha could hardly breathe, she never faltered, pursuing closely enough that Prax admitted her spirit as a true leader. Just as the finishing blow was about to land, Bak arrived, blocking the strike and begging to take her place against Prax. But Elsha stopped him, affirming that she had promised Fine if she won, the villagers would be freed, so she must finish this fight herself. Hearing that, Bak vowed to atone for being distracted by the wall earlier, declaring he would become her sword. He reminded her of his words. Only she could save herself, he could only help her. Bak transformed into the weapon Muga for Elsha to wield, but its sheer weight slowed her attacks. However, Bak fired thrusters from the sword's hilt, spinning her continuously though difficult to control. This boosted her speed and power immensely. She tricked Prax into focusing on an aerial strike, then sliced across with a lightning-fast cut that cleaved Prax's Brehite in two without killing her thanks to Bak's special trait, ending the duel in knightly honor. Witnessing this, Princess Fine seemed disappointed and declared she would handle things herself. She ignored her promise and began transforming, but her benevolent self emerged to stop it. Fine confronted herself, admitting that all along she had feared both war and her own nature, hiding behind the violent persona. Now she resolved to accept every bloody consequence she had caused and to embrace love as her new guiding principle. Using the ring, she sealed away her violent self and allowed her loving self to take over permanently, apologizing to everyone, especially Elsha, for her cruel words. The arbiter of selection observed and was pleased with this outcome. Fine, however, sorrowfully admitted the war could not be avoided because the wheels were already in motion. The fault was hers, and she would bear the responsibility. When Elsha heard that Fine had chosen love as her way of life, she extended her hand, proposing an equal alliance, since Rekka was hunting them both, and explained that Edgar's way of friendship was trust repaid with trust. Overjoyed, Fine accepted and embraced this new hope. In Rekka, Emperor Zetsu rallied his people under the banner of the Wall's will. Soldiers roared in unison, and he charged into battle with fervor. Sin was granted a ring, and Kai called her his right hand, vowing to crush Ludo and show Shu by the cost of betrayal. In Ludo, Fine wanted to confess her sins, admitting that her violent persona had sparked the war. But Supreme Secretary Peeth urged secrecy to avoid panic and focus on victory, insisting this was the only path to atonement. In the research chamber, Shu Bai analyzed Ludo's technology, theorizing that Brehite came from faith particles, liquid nanometal within the earth that reacted to belief, the ring merely being an amplifier. Ludo was attempting to create artificial rings. Shu Bai suggested adjusting the spiritual circuitry, increasing sensitivity, and simplifying the structure, sparking an epiphany in engineer D-Mine, who immediately overcame obstacles. While D-Mine was absorbed in modifications, Shu Bai quietly pocketed 2 rings as his payment. Fine later called Elsha and Atli privately, confessing she still feared war and doubted herself. But Elsha reminded her that she had already conquered her inner darkness, and that the alliance was born thanks to her. Hearing this, Fine asked if they could be friends after the war. They assured her they already were. In the War Council, Prax reported that Rekka's army outnumbered Ludo's 3-1, and the cluster cannons at Sibo had been sabotaged by commandos and were under repair. Shu Bai asserted that Zetsu would not strike weak points, but instead attack the Viola border, nearest to Maestrog, where the cannons were fourfold and the terrain narrow, because Zetsu only saw victory in crushing Ludo at its strongest. Still, Bak's group would take their ship to guard Sibo as a precaution. With the campaign launched, the villagers remained in Ludo's capital. Prax visited Werner, asking him to return to battle, but he refused. Still tormented by the day he accidentally shot the princess, furious, Prax mocked him, questioning whether he was even alive anymore, and demanded he fight for Fine. Meanwhile, Shu Bai spoke privately with Bak, saying his appearance had shattered the world's fragile balance, and the war would destroy both Ludo and Rekka. Afterward, Bak would unite Lingaland, merging Rekka's might with Ludo's technology to finally challenge the wall. Bak replied that first they had to win at Sibo, for their worst enemy would surely appear there. Just as predicted, at Viola Canyon, Rekka's generals appeared, Western General Go and Northern General Bai leading the offensive. Prax led Ludo's armored brigade into the sky to confront them. While at the Sibo border, Bak's group fell into an ambush by Sin and Kai. Bak returned to the battlefield, leaving Atli alone to watch the ship. Sin stepped out to fight back so that Kai could pursue and capture Shu Bai. Shu Bai ordered Bak to hold Sin, while the ship required Elsha to break through the encirclement and maximize speed regardless of Kai rushing toward them. Bit controlled the tail cannon and prepared to fire. Sin charged in, mocking Bak for being a coward who never killed anyone in Brehite battles. Bak replied that he had changed. He flew into the sky, rendering Sin helpless as he repeatedly disengaged. Then Bak swooped down, grabbing Kai and lifting him into the air so the ship could shoot him while airborne. Kai was powerless, unable to move at all, and so he kept being snatched up and shot until he could no longer fight. Just as Bak was about to land a finishing blow on Kai, Sin rushed in to block the fatal strike. She reverted to human form, clinging onto Bak, intending to use the primal bomb together with him. However, Bak quickly escaped by cutting off the detonation cord. He punched Sin once and scolded her, telling her not to think about dying for others. If she wanted to help someone, she should first find a way before thinking of death. After saying this, he transformed again and returned to Atli. Bak became her weapon, allowing her to unleash a sweeping strike to break through the enemy's encirclement before continuing their movement. Meanwhile, in Prax's battle, though she was still overpowering two generals, she was suddenly ambushed by the Emperor. He hurled a fiery spear straight at her, sending her flying into the wall of the capital. The Emperor then received word that Kai had been defeated and Bak's group was advancing. He calmly ordered the entire army to have dinner and resume the battle the following day. That evening, Shu Bai scolded Bak for not killing Kai, saying it disrupted their plan. Bak replied that he would not kill a future ally, because if he wanted to unify the nation later, Rekka must become a friend. Hearing this, Shu was troubled, while Bak declared himself a king who wanted to befriend everyone. In the medical tent, Kai awoke and was told Sin was still alive. He bitterly screamed in rage over his defeat. The war between the upper nation Ludo and the Republic of Rekka had erupted. Through Shu's strategic maneuvers combined with Bak's versatile combat, Kai had been utterly defeated. However, Emperor Zetsu's power seemed limitless, and even Prax had experienced the vast difference in strength. Amidst this situation, Bak's ship welcomed Ludo's elite unit on board. Bit reassured them that by fighting alongside Edger and the ship that had defeated Rekka's undefeated general, they too could become heroes. On the deck, Shu Bai explained his theory of faith particles. According to Ludo's research, these were the particles that composed Brihites. The spiritual foundation of each person served as the core of their power. A defeated warrior vanished because their spirit was destroyed, causing their body to disintegrate into faith particles. The ring accelerated this process. Yet when Bak won, his opponents did not dissipate, and Shu Bai was still seeking the reason behind this anomaly. Thus, he decided to remain with them to uncover the mystery. Shu assessed Bak's Brihite compatibility as extremely high, which was why he could transform and create clones, but his damaged right arm might prevent him from using a finishing move Shu provisionally named Saber Blow. For convenience, Shu suggested they name all their techniques. If Saber Blow could not be used, then Bak would be forced to lock onto targets with another move or shatter the opponent's faith, which meant sometimes killing would be unavoidable. The night before the battle, they discussed strategy. Rekka's army was stronger than expected, and their only victory so far was defeating Kai. To turn the tide, one general approved a plan to lure Rekka's army into Viola Canyon as a decoy maneuver. They would set explosives on both canyon walls, and once Rekka's forces fell into the trap, they would collapse the canyon to bury the enemy. It had once been a tactic in Iki, but now they would survive while Rekka's army would perish. At this moment, Peeth arrived with news that the people were gathering outside the city to plead for an end to the war. Fine personally stepped out to reassure them, declaring that Ludo was built upon love, dreams, and hope. Edger's support was proof of this. She asked everyone to believe in her and the soldiers of Ludo. Hearing her words, the crowd calmed down and cheered. On Rekka's front lines, Sin tormented herself over the humiliation of her defeat. She begged General Go to train her with real spears. At that moment, Emperor Zetsu appeared. He had heard of Sin's desire to live for vengeance. He gave her a trial of shame and willpower, then bound her and hurled her into a raging river, driven to the brink of life and death. Ren finally screamed that she would never die before taking her revenge inside the ship. Elsha and Atli discussed the boundary between life and death. They understood that Arrow hated killing, but Elsha had decided that to protect the village and survive, sometimes one had to get their hands dirty. Bit overheard everything from outside, then rushed to Shu Bai, asking to obtain a ring. But Shu Bai reminded him that since he had not even fired the cannon properly, how could he control the Brihite? Still, he allowed Bit to practice simulated shooting, and encouraged him by calling him a secret weapon. Just after Bit left, Bak arrived and asked Shu why he wanted victory so badly. The next day, the war resumed. Bak's group charged forward, luring the enemy exactly as planned. However, just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, Bit reported that a lone Brihite had appeared behind the ship. It was Kai, brushing off the dust of battle. He roared, mocking Shu's trickery. his eyes blood red with hatred, then transformed to block the ship. But his wounds were still there, and soon he was blown away by the ship. Impatient, Atli jumped out to fight. But Elsha shouted for her to hold her position since without her the ship could not reach maximum speed. Atli declared that her faith was that she could handle it no matter what. She then attacked Kai relentlessly with her thunder whip. Bak also descended to assist, saying they didn't have much time to play with Kai and needed to finish quickly. He kept kicking Kai into the air, and now the results of Bit's late-night training finally paid off. He aimed the ship's cannon precisely at Kai and fired, shattering his will. Now the rest was left to Ludo's soldiers, since according to Shu Bai, once Kai had lost all faith, even an ordinary soldier could defeat him. Meanwhile, Bak's ship slipped behind Rekka's main army. On the front lines, Prax was still fighting, haunted by the looming shadow of Emperor Zetsu. But she forced herself to resist. From the command lines came reports to the Emperor. Sibo had opened fire, Kai was out of contact, and the situation was in disarray. At that very moment, Sin returned, facing the Emperor. She admitted that her greatest chains had been regret and her fear of Shu Bai. But now those had been torn away, leaving only vengeance in her heart. Pleased by this, the Emperor granted her a ring. As for Kai, he was gradually losing the will to fight, left at the mercy of Ludo's soldiers. Just then Sin arrived to aid him, with a new Brithite named Repu capable of flight. She offered herself as wings so Kai could destroy Shu Bai. However, Kai's pride and shame held him back. He did not want to rely on a woman's power. Sin scolded him directly, saying that was not dignity but ego, and that winning by any means was more honorable than losing out of pride. She said she was a tool of war like a spear or a sword, and it was a warrior's duty to use such tools. Her words struck the core of his stubbornness. Kai awakened to the realization that his vow of invincibility had long since turned into arrogance. He thanked Sin but warned that he would exploit her completely to achieve his goal. Sin accepted. The two then fused together, and Kai ascended into the skies with Sin. On Ludo's side, the enemy had been lured into position, but Prax's unit had not yet broken free, risking being buried together with Rekka. General Bai was still chasing her closely. Just then, Bak's ship arrived to support, bringing everything under control. However, just as they prepared to fire, Kai appeared, raising Rekka's flag high in the sky and solemnly declaring his mission to unify Lingaland to create peace. Kai recalled the ideals he had once forgotten in hatred, and he changed his target. He no longer aimed at Shu Bai but directed all his power at Bak. Since Shu Bai himself had once told him that Bak was his true enemy, Shu Bai's ship opened fire, but Kai blocked it. He struck Elsha, sending her flying and leaving her unable to move. He then turned to Shu Bai and declared that he should stand there and watch, for he would crush Bak the same way Shu Bai had destroyed the promise between them. Then Kai and Sin turned back to fight back. But now, Bak's injured arm began to hinder him, causing him to lose control. Despite being wounded, Bak accepted the fight against Kai. Meanwhile, as Elsha regained her movement, she had to face General Gaul. Atli tried to help, but Bai stopped her. At that moment of crisis, Prax's unit appeared to aid Elsha and Atli, while Prax herself joined to support Bak in the fight. But because Bak was injured, he could only stand by and watch. After a fierce clash, Prax called Bak to ascend high into the sky. Kai and Sin did not hesitate to give chase. Once they reached a certain altitude, Prax spread smoke to obscure Kai's vision, luring him higher into the defensive devices. Circling behind, Prax shoved Kai into the device, electrocuting him. She wanted to seize the chance to finish him off, but Bak stopped her, refusing to accept victory in such a way. Sin, feeling insulted, broke free of the trap and continued pursuing Bak and Prax. When Shu Bai saw Bak again, he called on him to transform into a weapon for Prax, reasoning that the injured arm would not be affected this way. Bak agreed and transformed. Both sides entered into combat, their battle broadcast by the Supreme Being for all Ludo's citizens to see. If Prax won, the kingdom would gain renewed faith. But if not, the princess would have to understand what that meant. With her longsword advantage, Prax easily knocked Kai's spear aside and moved to finish him. But Kai and Sin split apart. Just as they attempted to merge again, Bak split off and restrained Sin as Kai fell. He hurled ropes to bind Prax and drag her to the ground. Bak had no choice but to release Sin and dive after Kai, dragging him back into the sky, leaving Prax to fight Sin. Meanwhile, Bit and Shu Bai were still struggling to lure Rekka's forces into the designated position. Seeing the situation stall, the princess could no longer remain still and decided to join the battlefield. Bak once again pulled Kai high into the air, He told him that it was not their trap, but something placed there to stop anyone from going beyond. He reminded him of the tale of Lingaland covered by the sky and walled in on all sides. Heated words followed as Bak asked what Shu had truly betrayed his nation, or a person but never himself. Before the battle, Shu Bai had confessed that his goal was to win and escape beyond the wall, to learn everything about the world inside and outside of it. He believed someone had created the wall for a reason and had sent Bak, and so he did not regret abandoning his country or his old friend. To him, his small genius mind could only rest when it had verified that the world was larger. Kai spat back that this was the rhetoric of an empty man with no homeland and no faith. Bak answered that emptiness allowed him to step into anyone's shoes. Sin arrived at that moment, and the battle resumed. Kai slammed back down from the sky to the ground, scoffing that unraveling the mysteries beyond the wall was nonsense when so many inside still suffered in poverty. He accused Shu Bai of selfishly turning his back on them, but Bak disagreed, saying Kai's voice sounded as if he were speaking to himself. Enraged, Sin fired on Bak. Meanwhile, aboard the ship, Shu Bai lacked operators. Elsha and Atli were tied up holding back Rekka. Communications with Arrow were unstable, and the weapons bay was unmanned. Bit immediately jumped onto the controls. Just as Kai pressed Arrow down, a radiant light burst forth. Halting the battle, Princess Fine entered the field with her own ring, declaring herself the supreme princess of Ludo with her Brihite named Love Salute, and proclaiming her faith that love is everything. Every attack against her proved useless. She then used her power to heal everyone. Just as matters seemed to turn, Emperor Zetsu of Rekka appeared. Seeing the princess take the field, he declared that he too should greet her, with overwhelming might. He blew away all the explosives Ludo had planted. With only a few gestures, he sent Bak's group flying. Not even the princess could endure this power. Her darker self struggled to break free despite her resistance. At last, she succumbed when the Emperor shattered the sealing ring, and her evil self emerged fully to face him. The princess struck first with a kick against the Emperor. Though he had a shield, she still pierced through and pinned him to the ground. But he had the ability to absorb Brihites, causing her to lose a leg. Desperate for more energy, she charged into the melee between Rekka and Ludo, slashing madly to harvest combat energy. Her brutal rampage was witnessed in full by the people. We cannot allow things to go on like this. Bak told Prax to hold Kai down while he went to stop the princess. He then created a clone to blind the Emperor, and afterward prepared Saber Blow just as the princess was charging. He slashed through her, restoring the sealing ring and suppressing her dark self again. Meanwhile, Shu Bai and Bit aboard the ship had also finished preparations. He called for everyone to pretend to retreat in order to deceive Rekka. They then returned, while the princess and Atli stayed behind to block the Emperor's attack. Elsha returned to pilot the ship under Shu Bai's orders, and afterward Prax also came to retrieve the princess and Atli to bring them back to the ship. When the entire Rekka army had gathered at the ship's bow, Bak stood at the front and was supplied with energy. The ship then fired its super energy cannon together with Bak's saber blow. Though it did not kill anyone, it wiped out all of the enemy's Brihites, except for those of the Emperor and Kai. However, the Emperor still ordered his forces to charge with conventional weapons. Rekka's generals even fought bare-handed against Ludo's Brihites. Rekka's officers shouted as they drove the infantry forward with guns, swords, fists, and even teeth. They declared that even if they lost their weapons, their bodies remained, and it was better to die than to live in shame. Bak urged Kai to stop since his soldiers were dying one after another. But Shu told him not to waste words because for them pride outweighed life. Everyone was horrified to see Rekka's troops dying steadily, even as they begged them to stop. In that moment, Princess Fine leapt into the storm of blades and bullets. She demanded that both sides and even Zetsu attack her, so she could absorb everything and return it as life force. The love of a sovereign would heal all. She restored both Ludo and Rekka soldiers, making warriors on both sides rise and shout aloud. Rekka's men replied that even if they were saved, they would show no mercy, because this was a battlefield, and fighting to the last breath was their way of respecting their enemies. Prax said this was futile, but Fine became all the more determined. Atli and Elsha also finished their battle. Princess Fine admitted that within her still lurked a darkness that craved to devour her enemies for strength, so as long as she could master herself, she would continue to sow kindness. She proclaimed her faith that love is everything. The sky trembled as the princess's compassionate power rebounded into Ojin. When restored, Zetsu's armor cracked and shattered. At last, the Emperor gave the order to cease fighting, admitting he had been defeated by Princess Fine. Go and Bai still wanted to fight to the death, but Kai sternly reminded them that the king's order had been given, and they must not bring him further shame. Then Princess Fine declared that Ludo would only defend, and if Rekka withdrew its troops they would not be pursued. Emperor Zetsu accepted a verbal truce promising not to invade Ludo in the future and withdrew. Afterward, Princess Fine thanked Elsha, Atli, Prax, and everyone for their united effort, and the group replied that it was her love that had ended the war. Then Princess Fine delivered a speech honoring the warriors, declaring victory, and reminding everyone to remember the lives lost. For whether Ludo or Rekka, all were precious. She vowed to bear the sacrifices to build a better future. On the other side, when Emperor Zetsu was asked what he thought of Fine's Brehite, he answered that whether it was beautiful, hideous, or worthy of killing, it was all the same, because he greatly looked forward to the next battle. Back with the group, the ship suffered a system failure after using back to amplify the faith particles, leaving it heavily damaged, so the citizens' welcoming ceremony and celebratory baths and feasts had to be postponed. Princess Fine said that upon returning she would tell her people the truth about her second self, for she could not deceive them forever. Prax believed victory would help the people understand. But just as the group returned to the city gates, the crowd roared and cursed Fine as a murderer and a demon. They shouted that they had seen with their own eyes her provoking Rekka. They called her a warmonger, a traitor to love, demanded that the witch be hanged, and cursed her for deceiving the good-hearted. For the Supreme Being had shown them only the moment the princess went mad, while cutting off the broadcast when she was saving others, planting doubt among the people. Furious, they transformed, forcing the princess to flee with Prax. When they returned to the palace, the two learned that villagers had attacked the laboratory and stolen rings. With the main force not yet back, only the garrison remained. If the citizens rebelled, they would have to be suppressed. But the princess forbade them from harming the people when she entered the council chamber. She finally learned that the one who had shown the battle to the people was the chosen one. She wanted to go out and explain everything to the citizens, but collapsed from exhaustion after the battle. Meanwhile, on Bak's side, while Shu Bai was concentrating on repairing the ship, they were suddenly attacked by a strange Brehite. Bak stepped out to fight, but was at a complete disadvantage. When he created 10 clones to catch it, the Brehite vanished. Back in the capital, the citizens had already flooded the palace gates. If silence continued, they would soon break the gates down. At that moment, the princess regained consciousness and decided to go outside to speak to the people. However, when one man stepped forward to ask if she had been the one to start the war with Rekka, suddenly Bak appeared and crushed him, then killed another villager before leaving. Chaos erupted. It turned out this was the Supreme Being's agent in disguise. He then disguised himself as another villager, riled up the citizens, and declared that the princess had betrayed them while distributing weapons to the crowd for rebellion. When he was finished, he returned to report to his master, who then revealed his true form. He announced that Princess Fine was stripped of her throne for angering the people and granted them freedom to dispose of her as they wished. Even the soldiers could not stop them. Even her 2 close retainers turned on her, intending to sacrifice her to calm the people's rage. But Prax refused to accept this and tried to take the princess away. The false Bak appeared again to block her, and Princess Fine was captured. Werner, enraged, rushed to confront the deity and demand an explanation. It was then revealed that God never desired peace, and through his words Werner realized it had been he who had sent an impostor to shoot the princess when she was a child. Furious, Werner transformed, but how could a man fight a god? He was overwhelmed, cornered, and forced to retreat. As for the princess, just as she was about to be executed publicly, the real Bak appeared and saved her. Werner had managed to get word to them. Shu Bai had poured all his strength into repairing the ship just in time to reach the scene. They quickly carried the princess away despite her protests. Prax stayed behind to fight the deity's servant, while Werner used the last of his strength to protect the villagers from the onslaught of Ludo's frenzied citizens. He was stabbed many times without a word of complaint. Bak rushed to help, but it was too late. Werner was gravely wounded, with only a few breaths left. He apologized to the princess and begged everyone to live on in his place. Before grief could set in, Peeth arrived with troops, demanding Bak's group hand over the princess, saying outsiders should not meddle in another nation's affairs. Hearing this, Atli declared firmly that she was founding a nation of her own. The ship, Grandager, would be its territory. She proclaimed herself the Union of Grandager, an independent country, and that since the princess was in asylum with them, they would protect her. After making this declaration, they departed. For the next 2 months, everyone and the villagers lived aboard the Grandager. From farming to livestock, the ship met all their needs. During one laundry day, they all gathered to discuss who would rule the new nation. Everyone nominated Atli, as she had earned the trust of many. Soon after, they received treaty letters from Rekka and Ludo acknowledging Grandegger as an independent country. Atli was given a special outfit befitting a sovereign. When the day of the treaty signing arrived, Bak and Shu Bai left briefly on some errand. Shortly after, many lords and rulers of small nations came to Grandegger to attend the signing ceremony, including the Handsome Men group. At that moment, Peeth arrived to sneer that Princess Fine had lost her throne. Yet she greeted him with a smile regardless, before he could gloat further. Ludo's army announced they had abandoned the nation of Ludo to follow Prax, for in the end, they only wished to serve the princess. Not far away, a mysterious figure observed everything. Meanwhile, in the Republic of Rekka, people were training to take down Brihites with sheer human strength. But aside from the Emperor, none had yet succeeded. Their soldiers had been weakened since their defeat in the last war. As for Kai, he was in his study, researching the faith particles Shu Bai had once mentioned. There he uncovered some shocking truths. Just then, Bak and Shu Bai arrived in Rekka. Bak called himself father, and called Sin his child after winning the battle, which made Sin furious. But she could do nothing because the minister appeared and declared them ambassadors from Grandegger. The minister introduced himself as the one governing the country in the emperor's absence. Shu Bai suddenly asked where T was, only to learn that he had long since fled with the nation's wealth. At that very moment, T was hiding in Ludo when he encountered one of the deity's subordinates, who handed him something capable of seizing control of the Republic of Rekka. Back at the negotiation, Shu Bai requested a piece of land in the north near the wall as Grandegger's territory, in exchange for Grandegger not attacking Rekka. Enraged, Sin lunged at Shu Bai to restrain him, but he had anticipated this and asked whether her blade could strike faster than the time it would take for him to pull the pin on his bomb. Hearing this, Sin hesitated, thinking he still had bombs hidden in Rekka. Bak seized the chance to kick her away, and Kai appeared to stop the fight. The signing ceremony proceeded smoothly before the emperor and all the lords. Later, Kai revealed that Shu Bai's true reason for asking for land in the north was not only to claim territory, but for something else. It had been mentioned in ancient texts, but had since been stolen, and the only one with access to the archive was Shu Bai himself. Kai demanded to know what it was, but Shu Bai ignored him. Kai then threatened to use Grandegger as a hostage since the emperor was aboard, and if he could destroy a Brihite, a ship was nothing. But Shu Bai replied that they would need a justification for such an action. The minister then offered Sin to kill him and frame Shu Bai enough reason for the emperor to act. In the end, Shu Bai yielded and told Kai the truth. In the north, there existed a second Grandegger. Just as he spoke, Rekka came under attack. Bak immediately grabbed Shu Bai, and they looked up to see a warship overhead. The pilot was T. Shu Bai reasoned that only the so-called savior deity could have enabled this. News of Rekka's attack was quickly reported to Grandegger. Elsha and Bit hurried to investigate. But upon leaving, they encountered a mysterious figure who said the founder invited them to the Lind Faith, located outside the wall. Meanwhile, T unleashed his might, bombarding everything around him. Seeing him fire even upon defenseless civilians, Bak charged into attack. But one Brihite was no match for a warship. T's counterfire forced Bak to retreat. Elsha called, urging Bak to return. At first he refused, but when she mentioned a secret about the wall, he complied. T grew more arrogant, commanding all Rekka citizens to submit or face merciless fire. The minister suggested surrender, reasoning that the people were Rekka's greatest treasure. On Grandegger, the mysterious figure met Bak again. Overjoyed, Bak asked about the wall, and the figure said the founder had declared Bak to be the newcomer, and that this was the ship of destiny. He urged Bak to visit the sacred site of the faith, the Epitaph Mountains, before departing. Yet Bak hesitated, recalling Kai's words, that in Rekka's prophecy, when the newcomer regains his memories, the world will be destroyed. But Shu Bai countered that it had already begun. For since Bak's arrival, everything had changed. Shu Bai believed it was the will of the ancients. Meanwhile, while T reveled in triumph, the emperor returned. T immediately opened fire. But the emperor transformed, summoned a colossal bow, and fired himself like an arrow straight into T's ship, cleaving the traitor in half with a single strike. Thanks to T's vessel, Rekka nearly recovered completely, now possessing countless rings and their own warship, no longer fearing Grandegger. T's failure was reported by Peeth to the deity, but the god was indifferent, caring only about Grandegger. He gave Peeth a ring and ordered him to carry out his mission. Soon Peeth evacuated all Ludo citizens and used the ring to raise another ship from beneath the earth. He commanded his forces to march and seize Grandegger, the Supreme Being even contacted Bak's group directly to warn them in advance. Yet the true mystery remained: how had he known about the ship? And why had he given one to Rekka? To resolve this, Bak decided they would investigate the Lind Faith, which might hold the key to protecting Grandegger from Rekka and Ludo's assaults. Everyone began their preparations in the following days. When Grandegger approached the wall, Ludo had already caught up, and Peeth ordered the dreadnought to open fire. Atli deployed Prax's forces, and they began sweeping through Ludo's units. But the enemy was too numerous. Realizing the situation, Shubai called for Bak to get ready. Elsha then turned the ship directly toward Ludo, and Shubai commanded the ship to transform, raising its cannon skyward. After that, Bak once again executed the combination move with Grandegger, unleashing a sweeping blast that wiped out all the Brihites. After ending one wave of the assault, they forced all of Ludo's troops back into human form. Though the ship was heavily damaged, everyone then continued their journey. The mysterious person appeared again, instructing Bak's group to charge straight into the wall. Before they left, Shubai released smoke to conceal them from Ludo's view, and Grandegger rammed forward, successfully passing through. To their shock, however, behind the wall was yet another wall. In the cockpit, the mysterious person explained that what they normally saw was just an ordinary wall, disguising the sacred mountain, and only those invited by the founder could pass through. At that moment, Bit looked outside and saw strange pillars. When he looked closely, he realized they were human heads. Prax even saw her brother's face among them and rushed down to investigate, but was stopped. The figure revealed himself as the creator. He explained that the faces were of those who had perished in Lingaland, and their souls stretched from the mountaintop to heaven. The reason he wanted to meet Bak was to have him speak to the world. Bak was a lost child from beyond the wall, and because he was lost, he longed to return to the world where he was born. He then forced Bak to remember the mission of the one who was sent. Bak's body burst with unfamiliar power, causing him excruciating pain. At the same time, the illusory wall behind them vanished, opening a path for Ludo to storm in. Ludo quickly captured Grandegger and bombarded it. Elsha prepared to turn the ship to fire back, but Bak separated from the formation, insisting he would face Ludo himself. The others urged him to return and coordinate, but Bak no longer seemed like himself. He charged alone into the barrage, single-handedly sweeping through Ludo's forces, then faced the dreadnought. Peeth remained calm, reasoning that Bak's attacks never killed, so they would be safe. But in the next instant, amidst Peeth's desperate cries, he dissolved before everyone's eyes. Bak's blow had killed Peeth for real. Horrified, Bak panicked and apologized, realizing it was the first time he had taken a life. Then inside him, a system announced that connection was complete and initiated the purification process. Immediately, Bak and the dreadnought together annihilated countless soldiers. While more and more faces appeared on the pillars, Bak screamed, begging it to stop. As the power inside him spun out of control, everyone regrouped in Grandegger to discuss the prophecy of Rekka that when the newcomer attained self-awareness, the world would be destroyed had come true. At that moment, the servant of the Chosen One, Dissonanza, appeared along with Rudolph. Rudolph confessed that he had long known of the prophecy and had received a divine decree from heaven. He revealed that the name Bak Arrow was in fact the being sent by God to end the world. Lingaland was merely a fruit on a tree planted by God, and when the fruit grew too large, it had to be harvested. Arrow had been sent to harvest it, but upon arrival, he lost parts of his memory and his power. Now God commanded Rudolph to correct the mistake and awaken Arrow's true form. Rudolph then broke into a frenzied hymn, exalting calamity. Amid his deranged chanting, Bak continued to rampage, slaughtering all of Ludo without mercy. Prax realized he had orchestrated everything from the very beginning. He admitted to letting Rekka and Ludo acquire dreadnoughts in order to lure Arrow to the Epitaph Mountain, the place closest to God, to trigger his true self. He further revealed that he was not a Lutohian but the one chosen by God to maintain order. Bak was horrified to learn that he could not leave the Brihite until he harvested the entirety of Lingaland. Rudolph incited Bak to erase Grandegger next. In despair, Arrow summoned all his willpower to block the sweeping blast. He immediately called his comrades, begging them to destroy the dreadnought, as it amplified his power, and he didn't want to kill any more people. Elsha believed Arrow could still control himself, but Arrow admitted he was straining to his absolute limit and could collapse at any moment. The entire crew looked to Shubai. Shubai resolved to fire at Maestrog's bow to sever Bak from the amplification system and then bring the ship down. He instructed Arrow to flee somewhere without anyone around and promised to stall Rudolph to find a way to save him. Princess Fine wanted to sortie, but Shu Bai told her to let Prax, who had been trained for aerial combat, take the role. They then fired cannons at back while Dissonanza used Phantasmone to cause disruption. But Atli bound her legs, giving Prax the opening to unleash Noble Hurricane and drive Dissonanza away. The whole team grit their teeth and kept their focus on the true goal-freeing arrow instead of chasing the enemy's bait. Bit unleashed every gun available and successfully destroyed Ludo's dreadnought, allowing Back to break free and fly away. Shu Bai then ordered Elsha to turn back toward Epitaph Mountain because Rudolph had just carelessly revealed that this was the place closest to God, meaning if anywhere could expose God, it was there. However, Rudolph had anticipated Shu Bai's plan and erected a wall blocking their path. Normal attacks could not break through. While Shu Bai strained his mind searching for a solution, Bit pulled out a fragment of Rakugo's remains that he had secretly kept. Shu Bai examined it and realized it was the key to overturning their predicament. Shu Bai began researching Rakugo while they remained trapped, whereas Back, though having escaped and returned inside the wall, found himself unable to remove the ring. Soon after, Granger's communications were cut off, likely due to Rudolph creating another temporary wall, just like when he had blocked Ludo before. Shu deduced that if Rudolph was busy blocking one route, it meant another exit must exist. Elsha and Atli wondered whether resisting God was even possible, but Bit calmly reassured them that Shu was still buried in his lab as always and would find a way. Shu himself admitted that he was gambling his intellect against the will of God. He summoned Princess Fine for a private meeting. Meanwhile, Rudolph suddenly appeared before Emperor Zetsu and Rekka, mocking an old incident of hiding living people inside barrels with liquor as a vile jest, then proclaimed that God had decided to annihilate the world because Zetsu's growth had exceeded divine limits. The Emperor's expanding power and authority threatened the order God had imposed. Zetsu roared with laughter, condemning God's arrogance and declaring he would kill both Arrow and Rudolph and even strike down God himself. He ordered the modified single-pilot dreadnought to be launched. Prime Minister Kaio volunteered to take the helm, declaring that the Emperor was Rekka's very soul, and if they lost, everything would vanish. He named the ship Derka and set it into flight. On Granger, when Atli tried to discuss their next moves, the village elder spoke for the people, saying they had decided they would follow the young ones to the end, as Edger had no future left regardless. Elsha accepted their trust, growing more determined. Meanwhile, Back continued his internal struggle, trying to end his own life to stop the catastrophe, but the ring would not allow it. At that moment, Rudolph suddenly lifted the temporary wall, and Granger immediately surged forward. Prax deployed. Elsha pushed the ship to top speed, and Princess Fine pleaded that they must find Arrow before either Zetsu or Rudolph could act. With nothing else to do, Bit went to Shu Bai to complain, only to be told to wait because Shu was on the verge of finishing a secret weapon. Elsewhere, Back stumbled into aerial traps, and while fighting, he saw a Rakugo rift open. He slipped inside and emerged in another space. But before he could grasp what was happening, Rudolph dragged him back. Rudolph sneered that he should return to the fools still waiting, and hurled him down near the Emperor's ship. As Zetsu prepared to strike, Prax appeared, boldly calling for dialogue. She declared that Granger would take responsibility for handling Back Arrow and requested that Rekka not interfere. Zetsu and Shu, for the first time, calmly exchanged words amid the battlefield. The Emperor praised Shu's firepower coordination in the previous battle, but warned that Shu had chosen poorly by betting on Arrow, now reduced to Rudolph's dog. Shu countered that it was precisely Zetsu's own strength that had strengthened his faith in humanity's power. The Emperor sought to fight God with brute force, while Shu would use intellect to save the world, but first, Arrow must be saved. Hearing Shu Bai's defiance, Zetsu conceded passage, but warned that if they succeeded in defeating Arrow, he would then unleash his full might to crush them all. Shu smiled and accepted. Granger immediately executed their plan. Bit fired a harmless shot to draw Back's attention, then yielded the stage to the star, Princess Fine. Hans and Fritz poured their attack power into the princess, after which Granero combined with Love Salute to fire. Yet Fine's healing beam was neutralized midair by Back's Faith Particle disassembly stream. But Shu's true objective was to close the distance. Fine then shifted into her dark persona and dove into lethal range, having accepted the risk that she might vanish if she overextended. Finnoir within the princess agreed to cooperate, for she too loathed Rudolph, and thanks to her ability to absorb and reconstruct faith particles, Love Salute nullified part of the destructive current. Fine reached back and tore the Brihite ring off Arrow. At that same instant, the princess's dark persona faded away, the two bidding farewell for the last time. Bak succeeded in breaking free of the ring. The plan seemed flawless. Shu Bai explained in detail the mechanism. Bak's attacks were the process of disassembling Brihite's faith particles into raw energy, while Lovesalute restructured those particles, thus allowing them to break his slashes and open a gap for approach. Only Fine could partially neutralize the damage and endure it without instantly vanishing. Everyone rejoiced that Bak was finally freed from the ring. But in that moment of relief, as Shu Bai clasped Bak's hand to pull him up, Bak disintegrated him. Rudolph appeared, hurling merciless curses, and revealed a horrifying truth. Even without a Brihite, the destructive power still clung to Arrow's body like God's curse. Anyone who touched him would be erased. He had become a living blade of death through mere contact. All were stunned. Shu Bai stared in shock at his own fading hands amid swirling faith particle dust, while Rudolph mocked him, jeering that the genius brain's grand scheme amounted to nothing but a foolish move before God's decree. Bak once again lost control and transformed into Brihite without a ring, fleeing to avoid contact with everyone. Prax immediately commanded Hans and Fritz to armor up and evacuate Ludo's citizens, but Rudolph blocked them with violence, sneering that God demanded even more sacrifices. Dissonanza reappeared to obstruct them. At that moment, Sin and Kai rushed in to fight her, though not of the same faction. Shu Bai had been Kai's close friend. The two combined their strength against Dissonanza. To their shock, she was actually wounded. Seizing the moment, Sin and Kai together struck her down, killing her, suspended in the sky. Kai coldly surveyed the tragedy, lamenting that this was the price Shu Bai had to pay for being erased by Arrow himself. He then swore to build a nation where the poor could live in peace, the very dream he had once accused Shu of abandoning. The group reeled from the loss of their strategist. Bit, however, refused to yield. He recalled the days of desperation in Edger and declared outright that compared to the hunger and poverty that had once devoured them, God was nothing to fear. They still had weapons, and they were far stronger now. Princess Fine pleaded for Granger to return to Ludo and save the people, for caught between Rudolph and Rekka, they would be annihilated. The team agreed, and Bit handed Fine a new ring Shu had prepared beforehand, proof that even as he fell, Shu had secured a fallback for his comrades. Prax entered the capital to call for evacuation. The citizens who once cursed Granger now fled as she fired warning shots to demonstrate the looming destruction. Rudolph appeared before her with ease, revealing his twisted philosophy. God was sustained by humanity's struggle for survival, and the day Lingaland perished would be the day he too expired, but his soul would serve as nourishment for God. He deemed all human creation meaningless. Prax burned with rage upon learning how he had twisted Ludo's hearts, turning their love for Fine into hatred, and how he had staged the cowardly bird trick that left her brother Werner in lifelong regret. She screamed that for her brother and her nation she would cut him down. Rudolph mocked that she and her brother had both abandoned their country. Prax charged, but his invisible hand seized her. Just as he was about to crush her, Bak appeared to save her. He demanded Rudolph return everyone and restore him to normal, or else be erased. Rudolph deliberately provoked him, inviting Arrow to wipe him out. But a governing law shielded him beyond the reach of the God-sent emissary. Bak's power could not touch Rudolph due to God's will. Furious, he could do nothing. At that moment the hosts finally entered, the sky resounding with the thunder of Derka's drums. Kaio piloted Rekka's dreadnought, using rings to let the soldiers fly with ease. Kai and Sin fused together, while Zetsu led his troops straight to the front and declared war, roaring that Rekka would behead Rudolph and his god alike. Rudolph manipulated Arrow like a cannon to open fire. Bak unleashed his destructive beam, but the Emperor calmly twisted the deathlight aside using the very faith particles in the air. Kai praised the Emperor's keen eyes and composure. Zetsu bellowed the order for the entire army to charge Rudolph. Once again, Rudolph made Bak fire multiple destructive rays at the troops, but the Emperor used his power to conjure mirrors that reflected every blast. Seeing this, Rudolph attacked the surroundings with his invisible hands. The great generals, together with Prax's squad, joined forces to resist. While the Emperor faced Bak directly, he told him that he would kill him if he allowed God to keep controlling him. Bak, resigned, replied that if the Emperor could do it, then do it quickly. Hearing this, the Emperor felt disappointed. Perhaps Shu Bai had died for nothing. He seized Bak, declaring that if Bak did not wish to die, then he must overcome God, and that if he could not control himself, then the Emperor would do it for him. The Emperor then began to vanish, and instead of turning into faith particles, he rejuvenated into a younger form. While Bak transformed into a sword in his hand, the reason the Emperor could wield Bak was because he continuously restored the parts being erased. Rudolph found this turn of events amusing. He activated Resonant Repulsion and summoned the monstrous idol Diobnetica as his own dreadnought, donning the Diostrage armor, proclaiming the creed, "God is everything," and unleashed an endless storm of attacks. Rekka's warriors could not withstand it. Hans and Fritz were knocked back. Zetsu was on the verge of collapse. Rudolph shouted that God's love was victorious. Just as the finishing blow loomed, Granger burst onto the field at record speed. Princess Fine had used her healing power on everyone. Zetsu urged her to stand back, saying her love had no effect against such a foe. But the Emperor's voice startled Fine as he explained he was borrowing Arrow's destructive power to strike back. The pair, the Destroyer and the Emperor, united like twin blades. Arrow shouted in excitement, calling Emperor, but Zetsu glared and corrected the title before charging in. Rudolph roared, preaching false harmony, declaring that their deaths would bring balance to the world. The defensive lines cracked. Everyone was at their limit. Then a hoarse scream ripped across the battlefield. Bit hurled himself into the sky despite trembling in fear. He declared he would not play the intimidation game anymore. Raising high the special ring devised by D-Mine and perfected by Shubai with Granger technology, a three-nation weapon. The crystallization of Lingoland's progress. Bit proclaimed himself humanity's secret weapon and summoned the Brehite Chiton. Shaped like a colossal ring, Rudolph mocked how one could fight with such a thing. Bit laughed loudly and shouted for Elsha. At once, she activated the ship with the ring, and it transformed into a giant machine. Brehite Granger towered over the battlefield. Its very first strike shattered the energy prison Rudolph had erected around the field. He gaped in disbelief that such a simple blow could break God's chessboard. Bit pounded his chest and shouted that he should have listened from the start. Humanity still had a weapon God had not foreseen. 3 hours earlier, Shu had summoned Bit and told him he would entrust him with the trump card. Though trembling, Bit nodded. Fully understanding his own faith, Shu told him he was not strong in raw might, but his presence made everyone around him stronger. Bit, long used to Shu calling himself a genius, muttered back that in truth Shu was the biggest fool in the world. Shu only smiled and placed all his trust in him. From then, Bit defined his creed as relying on nearly everyone else. Thanks to that, he relentlessly pressed the offensive, forcing Rudolph to shift targets, then attack others. Yet Princess Fine healed them with her power. Prax urged everyone to hurry, for when the princess healed others, she too suffered their pain. Hearing this, the Emperor and back lunged at Rudolph. He hid within Diobnetica, but the two broke inside and launched continuous attacks. However, he still managed to withstand it. After trading blows for a while, Rudolph separated himself from the dreadnought to fight personally. He and the Emperor clashed once more. As the fight dragged on, the Emperor began to falter, forcing Kai to intervene and support him. But even that time was enough for Back to analyze Rudolph's weakness. God too had wires. Kai looked closely and spotted the cables linking Diobnetica to Diostrage. If Rudolph were truly omnipotent, why would he need cables? The laws of Lingoland were still binding him. Zetsu roared his own name, proclaiming himself the strongest and vowing to kill even God. Rekka roared in unison at his command. Then all together they charged to cut the cables. Yet the cords were so durable that they shattered their weapons and rebounded, injuring many. The battle line was forced to retreat. Princess Fine immediately used her healing power on everyone. Rudolph mocked that it was nothing but human love, incomparable to God's grace. Fine staggered but insisted she was fine. She refused to be the only one whining like a weakling. Amused, he said he would see how long she could endure, then unleashed an all-out attack that injured countless. Even Princess Fine could no longer withstand it, and Bit himself was overwhelmed. The ship's performance began to decline. Refusing to accept defeat, Bit screamed for Kaio and Derka and recklessly proposed something insane: to merge the dreadnoughts of Edger, Ludo, and Rekka together. He shouted not to underestimate the power of reliance. The ships locked, their mass and faith particles fused as one. Granger and Derka combined, and Zetsu gleefully declared the great name Granrika. Bit accidentally called him Old Man, earning glares from both sides. But it lightened the suffocating air. Rekka gathered energy. Granrika ignited full thrust. Bit choked with emotion as he revealed this was the move Shu had prepared beforehand. The all-out Lingoland barrage tore apart Rudolph's formation. The Emperor then shouted for all to carve this battle into their hearts, because faith particles were the embodiment of will, and as long as Rudolph remained bound by the world's laws, victory was possible. He and Back together pressed the attack against Rudolph, their strikes flowing in unison. Though the Emperor's regenerative strength was fading, yet he declared that all that mattered was to bring him down. Back then unleashed his power, enabling the Emperor to destroy Rudolph's weapon. Zetsu and Arrow then combined their might. He conjured a bow of light and fired twin arrows as he and Back charged straight through Rudolph. All cheered in triumph, until Rudolph suddenly said, "Thank you." He had deliberately let himself be pierced. Seizing the chance, from the wound he flooded Arrow with the will of God, awakening the primal form of the destroyer. He then used Back to stab the Emperor. Kai rushed forward, but Dissonanza leapt in to block everyone, binding the onlookers, forcing them to witness the Emperor's fall. Arrow, controlled, apologized to Zetsu. Rudolph struck the finishing blow, but Zetsu refused to die silently. He replicated the princess's dark persona's technique that once seized power. He would die, but he would drag Rudolph with him. The Emperor then pulled all the rings from within himself. Before his end, he roared across Lingaland, proclaiming that each person alone decides their own path in life, that fighting spirit defines humanity, that even if God is the enemy, do not give up, walk the path carved by your own hands. His roar dissolved into the sky. With that, he vanished, leaving all in tears. An explosion followed, sweeping everything away. That evening, all mourned the Emperor, vowing to hold a grand funeral for him as though it were not that very day. Prax investigated, but found no sign of Back, Rudolph, or Dissonanza. Just then, word arrived from the handsome boy's farm. Back was there, laying waste to everything. Hearing this, Kai and Sin went into battle, for they had promised the Emperor to defeat Back, but Back was only firing aimlessly around him. Kai then confronted him. Arrow lamented that no one could stop him anymore. Kai calmly leveled his spear and unleashed a Dark Heaven Destroyer, forming a sphere of darkness that struck Back. To their shock, it succeeded in destroying one of his arms. Kai had compressed faith particles into darkness so dense it could not be erased before reaching its mark. Torn apart, Back gave a faint, sorrowful smile because at last, someone had pushed him to the brink of annihilation. Kai admitted that this technique he had learned from Emperor Zetsu, saying it was the belief of opening a path where there is none, and he had combined it with the belief of peerless, no hesitation, no fear, a single blade piercing through the heavens. Kai gathered power, intending to unleash the finishing blow. Arrow closed his eyes as if accepting, but at the very moment of life and death, a force field exploded. A gigantic figure stood between the two. A familiar voice resounded. It was Shubai. He said he had promised to save Back. The entire battlefield froze because they could not understand why Shu had become so gigantic. Shu appeared just in time and gave Back a ring. After that, he was able to touch Back. He confirmed that he had corrected Arrow's data and erased his destructive capability. Thanks to that, Arrow could release Brihite and return to normal. However, Kai doubted the enormous figure before his eyes, but Elsha and the comrades confirmed that was indeed Shu. Shu explained that his real body was sleeping inside Granger, while that giant form was only his Brihite. Previously, he had entrusted Bit to guard his body for 3 days as a foretold gamble. If time exceeded, then remove the warper so that his consciousness could return. Shu's belief was, I think, therefore I am. Thus his Brihite carried consciousness instead of turning into a weapon. Shu laid out the plan to use Arrow's own power to save the world, because Back's rays turned living beings into particles of belief and offered them to the god. If Fine's power could not nullify it, then Shu was willing to let Arrow erase his Brihite so that his consciousness could follow the stream of belief into the god's realm. Indeed, he had merged his consciousness with belief to sneak past the sensor system under Lingaland. However, the battle between Arrow and Kai had activated the sensors, causing him to be returned prematurely. And because someone thought about him too strongly, when he reappeared he became gigantic. Following that, Rekka demanded to capture Arrow because he had caused the death of Emperor Zetsu. Arrow accepted the guilt because he believed that if he had killed many then he must pay. However, Granger opposed, at least spoke up requesting his return. Kai warned that the words of a leader were national policy. Both sides were tense when the handsome men's group led by Brian, and Gordon stepped in, declaring this territory was under their sovereignty. If Rekka forced, then it would be infringement. They would be compelled to act even though they were not as strong as Rekka. They still owed Arrow and would not let anyone take him. At this moment, Shu proposed exchanging information about the true nature of the world in return for Arrow, because while wandering in the domain of God he had realized many things. Afterward, everyone held a feast at Granger. After eating, everyone began the meeting. Shu drew the diagram of the universe created by God. Lind spheres hanging suspended. Lingaland was only one Lind among them. The center where the Linds connected was the sanctuary. The electric signals of life forms were converted into energy to feed God. Brihites existed to concentrate pure belief. The consciousness of the dead turned into particles of belief and were collected into conduits. The skull pillars of Mount Epitaph were collection stations. Any land deviating from standard would be erased like slaughtering feral livestock. If Ero ceased being the destroyer, then God would move to another plan. The entire room was enraged upon realizing they were nothing but livestock. Brush shouted that they would fight as before. Rekka would carry on the Emperor's will. Fine and Atli hoped to try negotiations through words. But Shu said the path to the sanctuary could not be traveled in the usual way because the Rakuho tubes distorted space with anomalies surpassing current technology. Only consciousness fused with belief could pass through. At this moment, Ero confirmed that he had once fallen into a Rakuho pit for a moment and was pulled back by Rudolph. Thus the whole group agreed to return to Mount Epitaph to study the mechanism of Rakuho. Bro proposed a temporary alliance because of the common goal of meeting God. Granger accepted. Rekka hesitated, fearing Ero might regain destructive power. But Shu said the probability of Lingaland being erased immediately was even greater. Everyone asked Bak's opinion. He was still tormented, asking why he had lost his memory and wanted to go outside the wall. No one had a complete answer. That made Bak feel very afraid of accidentally killing someone. At this time, Kai coldly said that if he was so fearful of sin that he trembled his whole life, then he should rather die. He challenged Ero to a duel as a man, not as a general. Bak, after listening, also accepted. The battle between the two began, and Bak did not need to use a sword. The duel unfolded, Ero continuously dodging, while Kai shouted for him to feel the weight of what he had caused, reenacting each powerful slash of his sword. Bit and the others were worried, yet noticed that Ero still held on and refused to collapse. Amidst the storm of attacks, Ero suddenly realized that his instinct to dodge was because he did not want to die. He still had friends to protect. He cried out that he rejected death and struck back at Kai with a blow. Kai was very satisfied and then drew out the Emperor's weapon, immediately imitating Zetsu's technique, unleashing Demon Nether Road Slash with a dark domain, compressing belief particles to the extreme. But at the decisive moment, Ero blocked the attack with his bare hand. He confessed that ever since he knew he was the destroyer, he had asked himself why he still fought alongside everyone. Was the part of him wanting to save people a lie or not? Now he understood that what was called the system error inside him was what everyone had instilled in him. Elsha, Atli, Bit, Shu, Ren, Kai, Fine, Prax, and all the people of Lingaland, with their powerful will to live, had turned him from a destroyer into a savior. He swore to resist God's will of erasure, proclaiming himself the embodiment of Lingaland's belief, even including Zetsu's. He shouted that he would carry all the destinies he had erased with these hands. Kai told him to prove it with those hands, and then both rushed into a bare-handed battle. Everyone rejoiced upon seeing Ero fully return. After the fight, Elsha and Atli tearfully ran to embrace Bak, and Bit also took the chance to rush in and steal a hug. On this journey, Elsha had sent the villagers to stay at the handsome boy's farm, because it would be too dangerous if there were elderly and children. Meanwhile, Shu Bai spent time with Kai reminiscing about the past. In truth, the Emperor's death had been within Shu's calculations, so that Kai could take the throne and build the perfect world they had once promised each other. He had even drafted some national development policies for Kai, but Kai refused to read them. Knowing Shu had hidden a scar on his arm, they agreed to read the policies together once they defeated God and understood this world. Kai vowed to help Shu realize his dream, and the two once again made an oath together. Sin, watching from afar, was also pleased. After that, the journey to Mount Epitaph began. They easily passed through the wall. Outside, the piled-up souls of the dead still towered high. Everyone together held a minute of silence for them. At that moment, Rudolph, still alive, appeared. He declared that he would live until this world's end. He said God had abandoned Lingaland and he had come here to pass judgment. Then a gigantic Rakuho appeared right in the middle of Lingaland. It began to activate, shrinking the walls. The people panicked and fled. Seeing the situation worsening, Shu Bai ordered Kai and a few others to return and destroy the Rakuho while he stayed behind to fight Rudolph. Rudolph had forged a spear from the souls of the dead and hurled it into Granger, pinning the ship to the ground. They struggled to break free, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Kai's group encountered Dissonanza blocking their path. Prax stayed to fight her, while the rest focused on breaking the gigantic Rakuho, but it was too tough. As for Bak's group, Shu Bai was trying to find a way out before they were crushed. But at that moment Bak gathered his strength, and then separated Rudolph's spear back into pillars. Shu Bai realized that Saberblaw's power was the separation of belief. They then temporarily defeated Rudolph and returned to help Kai's group destroy the massive Rakuho. However, just as they returned, Rudolph reappeared. When the situation seemed hopeless, Shu Bai laughed. He said that if Rudolph still tried to stop them because they were a threat preventing Lingoland's destruction, then they still had a chance to win. Shu Bai then had Bak combine with Kai. He transformed into a sword. Dissonanza rushed in, but Prax attacked her, and Bit held off Rudolph. Kai and Bak then reenacted the Emperor's ultimate technique. Kai created a gigantic bow, and together with Bak, they charged straight at the Rakuho, creating a black hole that swallowed everything. Yet, just as they destroyed it, another Rakuho appeared. Shu Bai shouted that this was the moment. Kai and Bak immediately fired another arrow, piercing straight through the Rakuho. After that, everyone together passed through the gate to meet God. Rudolph, furious, declared he would erase Lingoland with his own hands, but Prax and General Bai would never allow that. Meanwhile, Bak's group finally reached the domain of God. From the center appeared a man who looked very much like Bak. He said they must not come here and transformed in order to send them all back. Bak opened combat first by creating 100 clones to attack. Kai also rushed forward to support, but suddenly another Kai appeared to block his strike. And then in turn clones of each person appeared to attack. Even Granger itself. The situation was worsening. Leaning against Bak's side, Shu Bai was trying to find a solution when Atli rushed forward to speak with that man. She asked why they had to endure destruction at the very least. They should be told the truth. A voice echoed down, calling humans malignant life forms, but admitted that it was time to reveal to all the origin of the world. Immediately an image projected. A fleet of space vessels carrying God's ancestors traveling across the universe beyond the wall. Mid-journey, an epidemic suddenly broke out, leaving only a newborn baby boy alive. To protect the child, they created the Lin system, and because the chance of survival was so slim, the Lins were forced to remain in a state of non-growth. But that consumed a massive amount of belief. Thus the cycle of belief was born. We are links in that cycle. Arrow was dispatched because Lingoland's instinct for survival had surpassed its threshold, causing the system to destabilize. That power had sprouted from Zetsu and spread everywhere, so it had to be purged before it was too late. The group burned with fury at being likened to livestock and declared they would not accept such a fate. They counterattacked with everything they had, but all their techniques were nullified. Shu explained they were lacking belief because they had left the cycle beneath Lingoland and thus had not reached the threshold. Meanwhile, beneath Lingoland, Princess Fine was leading everyone in battle. However, the man was far too strong, leaving many gravely injured. Once again, the princess had to endure the pain to heal them. Seeing this, Rudolph mocked her sacrifice and then unleashed another wide-range attack to see how long she could endure. But at that moment, his Brihite began to crack. That was the result of Kai and Bak's earlier strike. Seizing the chance, General Bai and Go performed a twin sword combo, spinning together to sever all of Rudolph's arms. Prax charged in next, using Werner's technique to launch a full assault, successfully destroying Rudolph's Brihite. Yet in their brief joy, Rudolph suddenly closed in on the princess, seizing her by the neck to see how long she would last. In that desperate instant, the Emperor and the princess's evil self suddenly appeared, blasting Rudolph away. He could not understand what was happening. This, however, was something the Emperor owed to Rudolph when Rudolph destroyed the Epitaph Mountains earlier. Bak had killed so many that the data of the two had not yet been transmitted, and Bak had bestowed power on them to return once more. Though they could not last long, it was enough for the two to join forces with everyone to defeat Rudolph. After that, all combined together, Princess Fine absorbing everyone's strength to supply the Emperor. He created an enormous bow, then fired himself and the princess's evil self as the arrow, carrying Rudolph and Dissonanza straight through the wall toward Bak. Werner and the others also appeared to lend aid. When the arrow reached its destination, all vanished. But this much belief was enough for everyone to fight once more. Bit rose again, combining all into one ultimate form. Yet God created 7 copies of that ultimate form to counter Bak. Still, they did not give up, all fighting together. Amidst the struggle, the system answered that the foundation of the world was to wait for the child's return. The entire machine of life existed only to wait and was not designed to change. Even Rudolph and Dissonanza were bound by walls of their own. But then Arrow declared he would shatter that wall too, and personally carry the baby back to its rightful world so that Lingoland could find peace. Finding the idea worthwhile, everyone agreed to follow Bak after that. They all combined their strength to amass belief particles, with even Granger transforming into a blazing phoenix. It soared across the sky, slicing through all the clones, leaving only that man, just as they prepared to strike. He suddenly vanished. A voice resounded, declaring that he had been merely an obsolete management unit no longer needed. Then all were transported to a massive gate, They were pulled inside, where before their eyes stretched an endless space like the image they had once seen, and there appeared a gigantic glowing child in deep slumber. Shu confirmed that the child had been asleep for more than 2,000 years, whether a prince or simply the sole survivor. They then debated what should be done with the child. 1 month later, Bak's group decided they would bring the child back to its homeland, while Kai's group remained to restore Lingaland. When all preparations were finished, everyone said their farewells. Kai reminded Shu Bai of their promise. After that, they all departed together, setting out on a new journey. Their next destination, Earth. With that, the anime comes to an end. Farewell.